A few months ago, I decided I wanted to learn a brand new language. And after some really interesting research, I found out about this program to teach foreigners who came to Thailand, to teach them Thai, starting from zero by just listening in their class. I found out that this school no longer exists, but the program has moved online and they still offer classes. So I thought, you know what, let's give it a try, and I joined one of their classes. So when I joined this class, I knew nothing about Thai, not a single word. But something interesting happened in that class. I had been listening to a conversation between two teachers the entire time in Thai, and I knew what they were saying. Or rather, I knew for at least 80% what their conversation was about. So to find out how much Thai I can actually learn with this method, I decided to go along with it because apparently something had worked. So what I did is I booked more lessons. I did 30 lessons since then. I also started watching videos of Thai teachers talking to each other and me just listening. And what I also did is I contacted one of those teachers and I asked them, hey, can we do one-on-one lessons? And since then I've done 4 lessons, I think. So after 30 hours, I started thinking, I realized something. These classes, I wasn't being taught Thai. Like they weren't teaching me Thai. What they were doing is the teachers were simply providing me with the language so that my brain could figure out how the language worked and could learn it by itself. And this is exactly the stuff that I have been reading about, the research, and it was really interesting how all of that worked. So I guess I'll tell you how this process works, okay? But it does work, okay? Because can I actually speak Thai? Well, Thai,พูดภาษาไทยได้นิดหน่อยเพราะว่าฟังภาษาไทยทุกวันวันจันทร์วันอังคารวันพุธวันนี้วันอะไร Wait, what day is it today? It's the 10th? It's the 10th. วันนี้วันที่10แล้วก็ I know you're really lucky because this is the first time that I'm actually speaking Thai out loud. The reason for that is actually quite simple. You see, speaking is not really the issue. Speaking is really just saying what you want to say. The problem is, or the hard part, I guess, is coming up with things to say. How does that work in your brain? And then how do you actually say it? That is the hard part. And that's exactly what I've been doing for these past 100 hours, is training my brain to think in the language, aka fluency. I've been developing fluency right from the start. So yes, this method does actually work. I'm truly convinced of that. This process, right, that happens in the brain, the learning of the language before speaking, it's a process that consists of 2 things, okay? 2 components, I should say. First of all, you have language. Second, before I tell you what the second thing is, let's really look at language first. What is language? I guess I would say when we're speaking about spoken language, which is what I'm focusing on, spoken language, it's really just sounds, right? It's just sounds. And wait, I'll actually prove it to you. 6 hours. I caught that. And this is just native material. It's so weird when you hear it in native material after you've been listening to it for so long. So why do you not understand these sounds? But someone who's Thai can understand these sounds. What is going on here? Well, the answer is actually really simple. When you hear these sounds, nothing happens in your brain. There's no connection. There's no meaning for you. For a Thai person, they hear these sounds, there is a meaning. Something happens. They associate these sounds with something in their brain. For example, when I say the words book or horse or phone, you can imagine what those things are. You know what they are, and you can't not know what they are. You can not think of them. You have these associations, these thoughts, these connections in your brain, right? But a Thai person might hear those same words, those sounds, but for them, nothing really happens because they never had to associate those words with those same things, right? And sure, Thai people also have books and they have phones, but for them to trigger those thoughts, I guess, they have different sounds, different words, like nansu and torasap. I probably butchered that, so
หนังสือโทรศัพท์
close enough, I think. So when you're learning a language, right, you're building this network of connections in your brain, like these neural connections. This whole network of connections that connect sounds that you hear in the language to the meaning in your brain. So every time you hear this language or you hear these sounds, your brain automatically thinks of the meaning that is attached to the sound. And then when you think in this language, when you go between these connections across this whole network, that thinking, that is fluency. But the question is, how do you get the meaning to stick with that sound? How do you attach some kind of meaning to that sound. And the school knows the answer to that, and this whole method is the answer to that. Because these teachers didn't only expose me to the native language, which is the first component of this process, they also put the language into context, and that is number 2 that we needed for this process. Language and context. Context is super important. So what is context and why is it so important? Well, first of all, context is anything where the language is used. It's kind of like the glue around the language that makes it stick into your brain. So the more context, the more glue, the better it sticks in your brain, if that makes sense. It's how the language gets its meaning, or I should say, how your brain can grasp a meaning when it hears that language. The more of this context, the more of this glue that you can understand, the better that it will stick in your brain. That's the important part. So the key of this method, the whole reason why this is working so well, is that I was not focusing on the language itself. I was always focused on the context. Every hour of these 100 hours that I spent on this language, I spent it with the language, not on the language. These 30 classes that I took, I was focused on the conversation of my teachers. I was just listening to the conversation, trying to guess the context by the gestures that they were using and the drawings that they were making. I was really there with the language, focusing on the conversation. And it's the same for the one-on-one conversations that I had. I was just speaking in English to my teacher and I had her speak in Thai, but we were still having a conversation. I was really trying to understand what the conversation was about. There was the language and there was the context, and I simply allowed my brain to make sense of the language. And now I can hear you thinking, why should I go through all this effort? Why would I go through all that effort, 100 hours in my case, when I don't have that much time? I'd rather just use that time to spend it on, I don't know, vocabulary or grammar, so I can be more efficient, right? And do it faster and achieve the same results. I think the answer to this question is actually quite simple. It's kind of similar to psychology. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's the same reason why psychologists don't give the answers to their clients' problems, right? They have to figure that out. They have to change something in their brain, their way of thinking, make those connections and find those answers themselves. They have to change that from the inside. And it's the same reason why you can't change other people. I can't change your personality. Only you can change yourself. It needs to happen from the inside, from the brain. It's the same with language. Nobody can teach you the language. You have to make these connections yourself. Those connections can't be made from the outside in a book or in a flashcard or whatever. You have to make them yourself. You have to allow your brain to make these connections in your subconscious. Only you can do that. Only you can learn the language yourself. Now sure, there's an argument to be made that, you know, if you use grammar, then you can kind of, and I agree with this, you can kind of plant a seed in your brain so that when you hear a language and you hear this grammar that you learned, it's easier to connect those dots. You already have that seed, so you know the connection is already there. I guess so. Maybe I think that does help. I think grammar doesn't have to be bad, but there's not really a debate about grammar or no grammar. I can make a whole video about that. I probably will. For the sake of this video, I was simply interested in how far I could take this with this method, using learning no grammar at all. Because you see, I've been learning Japanese actually for a while, and all I did was learn grammar, and not really listen as much. And I ended up not being able to naturally come up with the language. You know, at some point I thought, how is it possible to even learn a language when you don't even know how it works? And then I saw this and I was like, what? Is this really true? Can this really be done? So that's why I'm doing this. And apparently with this method, after hundreds of hours, you do end up speaking. And like you just saw, I can speak a little, not good, but I mean, not well, not good, not well, but still I can speak. So let's move on to the speaking part. How does that actually work? Like in these classes, right? I have the language, I have these sounds, and when I hear these sounds, I associate them with things in my mind. So that when I hear them, I think of something. Now, if you want to say something, you first have to think of what you want to say. And the idea is that when you think of that, the language also pops up and you simply have to output it, right? So it's really the other way around. But the thing is that it doesn't always work like that. For example, today is Friday. I just can't come up with the word for Friday. I've heard it so many times now, and I just, for some reason, Friday just doesn't pop up. I think of Friday, the sound isn't there. Even though when I think of the other days, one Jan, one Ankan, one Put, one Padahat, one Friday, I don't know, one Sau, one Atit, those I knew. I think of those, the sounds come up, I say them. But Friday, it doesn't work. I mean, how often do you think of something and you can't just can't find the words to say it? Or the other way around, you're speaking and then you hear something and you're like, no, I know what it is, but it's somewhere there. and you have to really think. It simply means that this connection isn't strong enough yet. So I think you just need more context and more repetitions, and ideally both, a lot of repetitions in different contexts. But this truly takes a lot of time, and this method works on the idea that you want to become fluent or conversational. So I can't really tell how well this works unless I spend at least 800 hours in this language. Bad roiชั่วโมง bad roi ชั่วโมง bad roi 800 whatever. You know, I'm really committed to this, so I'm going to spend 800 hours listening to this language. There's only one problem with that, one downside that I found after 70 hours, around 70 hours. See, I'm someone who loves learning language and focusing on the language. It's why I like Japanese so much. I think the language in itself is so interesting. But like I said, in this method, using this method, I can't do that. I have to focus on the context. Now, after 100 hours, I can't really say that the context of, you know, this room, watching videos there on my PC is really a fun context that I'm engaged in. No, it's getting boring, you know. If you look at my native language, for example, Dutch, my native language has always been in the context of my life. But, you know, my life is not really Thai language. So I figured maybe I have to bring my life to the language, really make this language part of my life. So I guess the next step I'll be taking is actually going to the country and have some fun over there. That's what I plan on doing. Now, I don't really plan to speak a lot, or I don't expect to learn a lot of language just by being in the context. I just want it to be more part of my life, for it to be more engaging, right? And I'll still keep track of my hours, and eventually after I hit 800 hours, I'll probably make another update video and show you the whole process from zero to hopefully conversational. If you're curious about this whole method, then you can check out this